We're closing in on the final episodes of Season 1, and I wanted to remind you that this thing does not happen without tension climbing. Not only did they make the best wooden training tools on the planet, but they also took a chance on a completely unproven podcast idea because they believe in the value of history and community. When you use the code STONE, that's STONE, for 10% off at tensionclimbing.com, you're letting them know how much you appreciate that support, and it helps us let them know that it was a good investment. So please, head to tensionclimbing.com, tell them thanks, and thank you for your support. Tensionclimbing.com. Mastery over success. Day 1. First up was the nose. Most famous rock climb on Earth. The two women finished it in less than 8 hours and 50 minutes, passing 11 teams along the way. And yes, that's remarkable. But more remarkable is what came next. For most of us, what comes next would be a rest day or 3. But these two, Quinn Brett and Josie McKee, they were just getting started. Day 2, Lost Arrow Spire Direct, 7 hours, 20 minutes, the fastest time it had ever been done. Day 3, the west face of Leaning Tower, just over 4 hours. That could be before lunch. I'd still be resting from day 1. Day 4, the south face of Mount Watkins. Josie had never even been on this route, and they were mentally, if not physically, exhausted. Still, they finished in just under 10 hours. Day 5. They slept in. I guess you can't blame them. Doing big walls and giant blocks of thousands of feet of nonstop climbing is, well, tiring. But then they crawled out of their sleeping bags and blasted up the south face of Washington Column in 4 hours and 1 minute. And that's enough, right? 5 big walls in 5 days? Surely, that's enough. But not quite. Day 6, northwest face of Half Dome. Recently, several pitches had fallen off the wall, and the new beta was to throw a knotted rope into a crack and get it stuck so that you could pull across the blank section. Not exactly your standard big wall speed climbing technique, and it slowed them down to 7 hours and 40 minutes. Yeah, that was their slow time. Day 7, southwest face of Liberty Cap, 6 hours, 13 minutes. Another speed record. 7 big walls in a week. And let me make sure you know here that I'm saying week, W-E-E-K, as in 7 days, because the fact that week, E-E-K, and week, E-A-K are homophones is ridiculously unfortunate in this case, and makes me not even want to refer to a 7-day period as such. Besides, 7 walls in 7 days just sounds a hell of a lot better. Josie, welcome to Written in Stone.
Thanks, Kris. I'm glad to be here.
You know what? I'm glad to have the chance to talk to you because I think we were talking about this podcast when it was just like a wee little toddler podcast when we were out climbing on the granite in Sinks Canyon. Mm-hmm. And now it's this like full-fledged thing that seems to be taking over my life. So I'm really glad to... As toddlers do, yeah. So I'm really glad to get to have you on here. But first, I have a question for you that I need an answer to. If you could remove any pitch of Freerider from the wall, you just pluck it off the wall, and you're going to replace it with a pitch of the same difficulty from Sinks Canyon, which pitch do you remove and which pitch do you replace it with?
Oh, man, that's a hilarious question. Which pitch would I remove? You know, before I answer this question...
There's always caveat. Everybody has a caveat when they answer my questions.
I think that there's there's many pitches up there that for a number of years I would dread. And I had to cultivate a different mindset around those pitches so that I could actually get my ass out of bed and leave the ground.
Yeah.
Because dreading something way up high on a big wall just weighs you down a lot more. And some of those pitches that I would dread, like thinking about answering this question, you'd think they'd be the ones that I'd want to remove, but like the things that pop into my head are ones that are like very classic Freerider pitches, and like you can't pull the monster off the wall, you can't pull the Scotty Berg off the wall. Like you got to do those. It's part of the whole process. Honestly, probably the sewer.
I guessed this was what you were gonna say.
Or the Sulatois pitch. Like either one of those. They're both 10 plus.
Yeah.
And they're both really freaking hard.
Yeah.
Can I just do Elmo's fish instead?
Totally. You could absolutely do Elmo's fish instead of either of those two pitches. I've heard good things about the pitch to Sulatois, though, even though it's hard.
Yeah. And actually, that pitch is more scary than it is hard. And I think it's particularly scary because of two experiences that I had on that pitch, and not necessarily, I mean, it is a scary pitch anyway. But I had two experiences on that pitch that were quite scary.
Okay. I'm going to want to know about those later.
Yeah, okay. I won't tell you about them too much. But
okay, so we're going to trade the sewer for Elmo's fish.
Yeah,
that's a good choice. That's a really good choice, actually. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about your progression as a climber before we jump into this, because I think it's really interesting. Like in my mind, I think of you as like starting your climbing career in Yosemite and big wall climbing. And I didn't know until I started reading a little bit that you were a comp kid. Is that right?
I had a brief stint of that, yeah.
I had no idea. And then,
I wasn't a very good comp kid.
Doesn't matter. And then you kind of were into sport climbing, and your first trip to the valley was just kind of driving through on a sport climbing trip, right?
Yeah, we were going through to go climb over on the east side. We climbed in the Clark's Canyon. Is that right?
That sounds right.
Yeah, over there right outside of Mammoth.
Yeah.
Bunch of little piddly volcanic formations. I mean, it's fun climbing, but it's kind of funny to think like you drive right through Yosemite to go climb on that stuff.
That's really interesting. And how, like I've read your piece in Valley of Giants, and I think maybe this is where I learned that you came into the valley as a sport climber and weren't climbing in the valley, but you sat there looking at El Cap, right? Tell me about that first time looking at El Cap.
Yeah, so we drove in. It was a little after dark, and my climbing partner, one of my kind of early mentors in trad climbing, he was a guy I worked with at the gym, Justin Bitkoff, and he had been up El Cap before, and he's like, "Wait, Josie, you haven't been at Yosemite? Like, I got to show you this." So we parked, went and walked out into El Cap Meadow, and looked up at El Cap and the little flickering headlamps all over the wall there. And right as we were kind of settling in to just hang out in the meadow for a little bit, the full moon starts rising up on the other side of the valley and just starts lighting up the wall. And that granite is so white that it just glows in the moonlight. So it was just this magical, awe-inspiring vision of a setting. And I think that was when I realized how immense El Cap is.
That's the perfect word for it.
Yeah. And I was kind of terrified, but very inspired. And I was like, wait a minute, this trad climbing that I'm just starting to learn how to do a little bit of, like, that can take me up that thing. Like, I want to do that someday.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to do that someday.
I think that's an interesting thing about El Cap is like, even if you're a gym climber, a dyed-in-the-wool sport climber, and that's all you ever want to do, you almost can't look at El Cap without wanting to climb it.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're a climber, that's just sort of this like icon that you feel like you have to touch at some point, regardless of, even if you're a boulderer, it's hard to look at that thing and not want to climb it.
Yeah, you got to know what it's like up there.
Yeah. And then I find this interesting too. You did a lot of aid climbing on El Cap.
Yeah.
How does one, like, what's that path like from sport climber? I want to climb that thing. I'm going to do a bunch of aid routes up El Cap and then back to free climbing.
But
well, a bunch for most of us.
Yeah. Well, at that point in time, as I was starting to get into trad climbing, and I probably climbed a couple pitches of 5.7 or something at that point and been terrified.
Yeah.
Like, this stuff doesn't work. I don't know. I never thought that I would have the capability to free climb up there. Like, I could climb like close to that difficulty on sport, but like not even quite there at that point in time.
Right.
And I never expected that I think in those years, I probably didn't expect that I would ever climb over 5'10" on gear.
What years were those? What year were you there initially?
Let's see. That would have been like 2004, maybe?
Okay.
Something like that.
So
Yeah.
the boom was still going on, it seems like, right?
Yeah. In terms of like the valley.
The valley free climbing.
Yeah. I mean,
speed climbing, all of that stuff.
yeah. Is it dead now? Did I miss
No,
the memo?
I don't
No, I'm
know.
just kidding.
But it definitely started in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was maybe when speed climbing was starting to like make headlines. I remember, I don't know if you knew Ivo Ninov, but he was,
I don't know him, but I know of him. Yeah.
when he was hanging out around there, he was also hanging out in Santa Cruz a bit, and that's where I was living at the time. So I met him, and he was actually one of the people that had showed me some photos up on El Cap after that first trip, but before I had come back and climbed it, and I was like, oh yeah, like I can do that. I'm inspired by that. And that was when those guys were setting speed records on like the hard aid routes.
Right.
Like scary,
which sounds
ridiculous
terrifying.
It's absolutely terrifying.
Like hard aid is scary enough in and of itself, but to try to do that stuff fast seems absurd to me.
Yeah. So it still seems absurd. So anyway, I guess to answer the question is I just never thought that I would have the capability to free climb, but I wanted to climb it.
Yeah.
So I needed to learn how to do this aid climbing thing. And it was a means to an end to get up there on these things. And anytime I could free climb, I would try to. But I remember thinking I was going to free climb some like 10 plus pitch on the Leaning Tower, one of my first big walls that I had aid climbed. And I like started out trying to do it. And I just had so much stuff on me, and I was so tired from hauling, and I was like, okay, I can't even climb 5'10" up here. Like this is too hard.
Yeah.
And then a couple years later, the first time I did the Salathe wall, I also had that mindset of like, oh, there's a bunch of free climbing up there. And I progressed a little bit in my abilities, and I was like, I want to see what it's like to free climb some of these pitches. And I did free climb a handful of the pitches on that attempt, but I was also wrecked, and it was hard to climb 5'10".
When you're up there doing that kind of thing, do you end up doing a lot more like French free, like sort of free climbing, pulling on gear when you need to, or do you go into full-on aid mode even on the pitches that are somewhat freeable just because you're so tired?
Well, that's really the dance of it, right? Like that's the skill that got honed over the years for me, and I think a lot of other people, where when I first learned how to aid climb, like you wear your approach shoes, you put the whole rack on, like you have a chest harness with rack on, like all the stuff, and you're not free climbing like that.
And you weigh an extra 120 pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I remember trying to free climb. My first route up El Cap was the Tangerine Trip, and we hadn't even brought free shoes, but there's a couple of mandatory little bits of like 5, 7, and 8 maybe, and trying to like step out of the 8ers with all this stuff on you in approach shoes is awful. It's so hard. And then as I progressed, I started realizing like, oh, the more you can like wear your free shoes while you're aid climbing and do the like aid moves while you're free climbing and just like transition smoothly between the things, it's really fun actually.
Yeah.
But it's a full mentality shift to use a cam like it's a hold, or to stand in an aider like it's a foothold, and then like step onto the rock and pull a hard free move.
Yeah.
But yeah, and climbing those routes quickly, like that's how you have to do it. And you start developing awareness of your ability to free climb, and you're like, okay, it takes me a moment to stop and think if I'm going to pull a move that's like in the 5'11" range. And so that's probably when I'm going to start pulling on a cam, because it's just going to be faster to do it that way. Or it's just going to be a little bit easier physically to do it that way. And you're trying to save all of your mental and physical energy and move as efficiently as possible.
And then when it comes to trying to free a route, you're basically just paring that down as much as possible. But having written this episode about Freerider and gone really down the rabbit hole of the history of every pitch, it's gotten me psyched to like, maybe I want to go not try to free the thing, but just go up it with that mentality of like the free as can be sort of attitude of pull on gear whenever the hell I want, aid through sections whenever I want, rest on the rope whenever I want, but climb up the thing. It sounds so much fun now. And before, it would have always been, in my head anyway, it would have been, well, if I can't free climb the thing, like if I don't have all those skills on lock, why would I even go try it? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much fun. And that's why I've done the nose and the Salathe or Freerider, like whatever variations, a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Is because you can get up it in that style. Like those are the routes that have the easiest kind of free and French free kind of stuff to do, and you can get up them quickly. And yeah, it's fun to get to move over that much terrain.
Totally. And that's sort of what I want to talk to you about is like you coach people through your company, Mind Athlete, and you've got this experience on the route. And I want to sort of dig into not only what is the mindset that you want to have, like going into it, what attitude do you want to have? Are there things about some of the pitches that if you want to really free it, you're going to need to really know? You know, like valley granite slab climbing is probably going to come in handy for the free blast and for some of the slippery pitches up high, you know. So I want to talk about that stuff, and I want to hear your stories about the individual pitches as well. So, and maybe I'll provide a little historical context as we go, or you can provide some where you know it as well. First off, is there an overall like process or mindset you like to be in when you walk to the base of El Cap, specifically Freerider?
I think one of the biggest things that I've had to cultivate over the years, mindset-wise, is remembering why I enjoy rock climbing, like what's fun about it, and turning that sense of dread that used to well up in me every time into a like playful curiosity of, okay, I wonder what it's going to feel like up there this time.
Yeah.
And just kind of tapping back into that each time that it pops up where you're like, oh, this is going to be hard, or I'm tired, or I'm getting frustrated.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we're just moving over stone. We're like, this is big kids' playground. That's what it's all about for me.
I love that attitude of it because it's such hard work up there. And I think that's what has always sort of, as I became a better climber, I moved away from wanting to climb bigger objectives, and in favor of just harder objectives, And I think a lot of that was the work and the dread of, wow, it's going to suck up there, when it could have just been, that's a big giant playground, and I could be curious about how it's going to feel with my fitness and climbing ability that I've built. I wonder how it's going to feel up there. Not, it's still going to fucking suck up there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
We talked about all of the weight of all of the gear when you're aid climbing, and what I discovered is the weight of dread is like hanging 15 pounds extra off of your harness. Like, you don't feel light.
For sure. Yeah, that's really important. I climbed on the Free Blast in the 90s sometime. Like, I think before Freerider was done. I'm pretty sure it was before Freerider was done.
Okay.
Huber had already been to the valley, so I think it was in his time away, because it was after he did the variation to the South but I'm pretty sure before Freerider. And at the time, I was like full of wonder and awe, So I don't even remember how I did on it. I'm 100% positive I did not red point it, but I don't remember the details of it other than just, we're climbing on El Cap, we're going up there. That's going to be so fucking cool. And at some point I lost that, At some point it became about red pointing and grades and how hard can I climb, and less about this adventure.
Yeah.
So I really love the attitude of walking to the base with that sort of curiosity. Let's talk Free Blast. First off, how many pitches do you do the Free Blast in?
It's 1 and 2 to the base of the roof, and then it's that roof pitch goes up into a corner. There's the corner pitch. There's the first slab pitch, the second slab pitch, the pitch off a triangle ledge, the $50, and then the top 2 5-7 pitches usually linked together with a little bit of simul climbing.
Got it.
Yeah, so it's 8.
Cool. So that roof pitch is, I think it was the final pitch that was freed on the Free Blast.
It's the hardest for sure.
Yeah.
Even though it's not graded harder than the other ones.
Yeah,
it
it's
is.
like 11B.
Yeah.
Same as one of those slab pitches. And it was John Long who freed it with John
Tall
Backer.
guy, that's why.
With Backer on belay.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons it was the last, because there were pins in the roof that he removed to make room for holds.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it wouldn't go without those holes that are pin scars.
Yeah.
Or if it did, it would be
much
514
harder.
Or whatever. Yeah.
Totally. So, are there spots on the Free Blast where you feel more insecure than other spots? I remember a feeling of insecurity up there. I was pretty new to granite climbing at the time, and I remember feeling pretty insecure.
Yeah, that pitch is quite insecure feeling. And part of it is the gear, because you're putting little offset cams in the pin scar right off the belay.
Mm-hmm.
So like the idea of, you don't really want to fall there, although people do, and it's fine, but it's kind of in your head. You're going to rip a cam and slam into your belayer.
Yeah.
You can get good cams, but it's like very fiddly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just for a short section. And then that first pitch of the kind of slabs is also some insecure pin scar climbing, and then some slab climbing that I've done it at times when we're just trying to go quickly and not free climbing, and it's like in the sun, and I'm like, this is impossible. I don't know how I've free climbed, and I on-sided that pitch, so like,
yeah,
it's not that hard, but like every time, and even when I am trying to free climb, and I'm like, can I do this? Like, is this possible?
I think that's the typical feeling on Yosemite slabs, especially. Like the glassy granite.
Yeah.
If you're not familiar with it, there's a lot of like, is this even climbable? What's happening right now?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the part below that, it's not that hard of rock climbing, but the gear's not that great, and there's a story of one of the guys I was on the SAR site with taking a giant fall, like, ripping a bunch of gear out of it. Before I had ever been up there, he'd told me this story, and then one of my times speed climbing up there, I decided to pull on a cam to make that movement quicker, and it ripped, and I took this
Ugh.
weird sideways fall and really messed up my ankle.
Gosh,
And then kept
that's even
climbing like
worse.
an idiot. Like, we should have bailed from there, but then we decided to top out, which is
Yeah.
silly.
That's even worse than just taking a fall off of the slab itself, because then you're pulling out on this thing and you just rock it off the wall.
Yeah. It was a sideways 20-foot slam into the slab.
Oh, man, that's
Weird.
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me at least, in the film Free Solo, this is the footage that gave me the most anxiety.
Yeah.
Was Alex on the slabs on the free blast, because I remembered the feeling of stepping on those glassy little holds.
But I don't know exactly how he did the roof bit. And I remember actually being up there one time when he was like,
I don't remember
previewing the
that
roof
part.
bit. I think he just did it the normal way that you do. But the slab pitches up there, he did some variation too.
Yeah, he kind of goes around.
He on that time, like, we were up there climbing underneath him when he was previewing, getting ready to do that free solo ascent.
Yeah.
And I remember him like top roping some slab off in space over there. Like, there's no bolts, there's nothing, but it probably just has more features and is better. I don't know what it's like, but there was some other variation.
Yeah, I think that's interesting about his ascent, is that he didn't have to stick to where the protection was.
Yeah.
You know, there is the scene where he's practicing it, or actually, I think he's soloing it, and he grabs a bolt, right? Or grabs a draw.
Familiar, yeah.
That's sort of the area that spooked me in the film. Just knowing what that granite feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is the scariest horror movie that I've ever seen.
Absolutely. No question at all. And we know the outcome, right? Like, we know he lives, but still, it's so fucking scary.
Yeah.
It can't not be. Anything else on the free blast? Are there things people need to be aware of if they want to go do the free blast that might help them?
Yeah, just knowing how to believe in standing on your feet.
Yeah.
And then getting into the $50 is this weird thing that it's way harder than it should be.
I don't remember this at all.
It's just a strange transition. Like, you're climbing little underneath the roof with all these holds, and then all of a sudden you got to like pull into this weird little corner on pin scars. It's just awkward. And it's another one that when the sun is on it, it feels so hard because it's super slippery. And then other times I've done it, it's like, oh yeah, it actually does feel like 510. But
yeah, I mean, I think that's important beta, like especially that glassy granite when it gets hot is just gonna feel like butter.
Yeah, that's awful.
And then, so the free blast ends on Mammoth Terrace, right? I think this is an interesting spot. This down climb off of Mammoth Terrace. How often do you find yourself down climbing on big walls?
I think the only times I've ever down climbed on a big, or like at least significant distances, because that's a full pitch of down climbing.
Yeah.
Is when you're trying to free climb. And so, yeah, those few pitches where you have to do a little bit down climbing on the Freerider are kind of the only times that I've done that kind of thing. I've done a fair bit of scrambling around in the mountains and in Joshua Tree, where you like climb up the formation and climb down it. And I think that that skill of down climbing is a skill that has been developed, for me, has been developed from that kind of scrambling around in the mountains type stuff. And where, like, if you're climbing without a rope, like, the rule is you don't climb something that you can't climb back down.
Right.
So you get really good at climbing back down things because it saves your life.
Totally.
So.
Yeah, I think especially for people who haven't really looked into this, who are newer climbers, when you think of climbing up a big wall, you just think of going up. You don't consider going down at all. But there are a couple of places, several places actually on this route, where you, at least some where you're down climbing full pitches, others where you're down climbing sort of across traverses.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. That pitch is a little scary because there's some loose rock on it. So just like, as we're talking about people maybe preparing to go up there, like, don't just blindly step down on something, because you can blindly step down on something that you don't have a chance to, like, test and knock on like you would when you're going up. Like, your foot touches it before your hand does, so just be careful.
Yeah.
Because you can kill the people that are hanging out below on hard ledges.
Totally. That's good beta. So you climb down off of Mammoth Terrace onto Heart Ledge. Leaving Heart Ledge, I've heard, is tough.
There's a move on that pitch that I would say is the hardest move on all of Freerider.
The hardest move on Freerider. And I've read on the internet people saying that's the hardest move in the world. I don't think it is. I don't think it's the hardest move in the world. But what makes it so hard? And I think this move, just to provide the history, I think this move was Hudon and Jones. I think they were the first to figure this out.
That sounds right. It is, so that pitch is 11C, and the rest of the pitch is probably 510 other than this move. So it's the 11C move, supposedly.
Supposedly, air quotes.
Yeah. It's essentially a rock over a very high, tiny foot with kind of no handholds. And from that rock over, you get up onto some very tiny handholds and hope that your foot stays and do one more move, and then you're done.
So it's one of those trust
your foot.
The foot moves, yeah.
And I've stood, and it, moves get harder when you have to do them from a stance. I've noticed this about routes pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's maybe part of the issue, is you're just like standing on this foot jug, and then you have to like go into just trying hard from standing there.
Yeah.
And I've stood there being like, I know this is how I'm supposed to do this, but it just seems impossible. And then you do it. And like, maybe you fall, maybe your foot slips, maybe it stays.
Yeah. It's like there's extra gravity when you're standing at a good stance.
Yeah.
And you just can't bring yourself to leave it.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then once you clear that move, that trust move, well, actually first, those sorts of moves I think are interesting. Like, we have an interesting opportunity in commercial gyms nowadays to start learning how to trust our feet on those more slabby, slippery things that we didn't have when I was coming up as a climber, because it was all about steep stuff. And I do think there's some interesting opportunity to learn that kind of thing in commercial gyms nowadays, with all the big, like, slabby volume climbing and stuff like that.
And your terrible little foot jibs.
Yeah, my terrible foot jibs, yeah. And I think that's why, who were the Alex, I keep wanting to say Alex Bridgewater, and that's not right. Waterhouse just did the nose, and they're comp kids, they've spent a lot of their lives climbing on volumes, and they said that prepared them pretty well for that kind of climbing, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a cool perspective to have, for sure.
Yeah. And then, is there anything else to be concerned about from that move off of Heart Ledge up into the down climb and traverse into Hollow Flake?
No, that's all like pretty scrambly climbing. And again, there's like loose rocks and stuff in there to be mindful of, but it's easy.
Okay. Well, this part I found really interesting when I was researching the history, because the first person to do this pitch into Hollow Flake Free was Stefan Glovac. Reading his account of trying the Salathe before it was freed was fantastic, because he totally admits, like, I got spanked and I was embarrassed and I wanted to disappear into the night, and not let anyone see me after I failed miserably, which I thought was really cool. But I think, and tell me if I'm right here, you may know, are people now going lower than his original traverse into Hollow Flake? Has there been you down climb further and traverse in lower? Is that right?
I believe so. I'm not 100% sure what he did, but if the original one was what they now call 12A or whatever, kind of midway through the down climb, I don't know. I've looked at that. It looks impossible. I have no idea how he did it. And I don't know anybody who's done it.
Got it.
So, yeah, you go down a little further and kind of just dance across. It's not very hard the hardest move via that lower variation is just kind of getting down right below the anchors. And it's weird because you have to step over like a little overhang and you're like, where am I going?
Got it.
And then you just kind of commit downward and it's not that bad.
Yeah. And then climbing up Hollow Flake, how's that?
Oh man. Is this where I get to tell stories?
Yeah, tell stories. Tell me about it.
My first time on the Salathe wall, this was my second route that I climbed on El Cap. I was a kind of a big wall noob at this point, and I went up there and had my haul line like probably on the back of my harness, which better to have it clipped to your front of your harness if you're getting jammed up into a wide thing.
Yeah, sure.
But so you go down, like when you're aid climbing, which we just like swing over and then you start climbing this wide thing, and you can push a 6 up a little ways and then it gets tipped out and there's a spot where it doesn't go in anymore. And then you're pretty much wedged in with like at least a single butt cheek in the crack. So you're not going to fall out. But then there's one spot where you kind of have to like get out and go around this little narrow bit. At least for me, somebody my size. I don't know what it's like if you're a little bit bigger. So I'm up there in this spot, and you have no gear in between you and the anchor,
right,
which is probably, I don't know, it's probably like 20 or 30 feet below you, and also like 20 or 30 feet over to the right side of you.
Oh man.
And like if you fall from there, like you might live, but you're gonna get like really messed up.
Yeah.
You don't want to fall from there.
Yeah.
And my haul line, I think it was stuck on something at the anchor below.
Oh no.
Like, a coil of rope or around the haul bag or whatever. But I just remember trying to do that move, and I'm like not fully in the crack, and then I'm being pulled down by something. And I like let out this yell of like, what the hell's going on down there? Like scared to my belayer.
Totally.
Like, deal with the haul line. And she like fixed it, whatever it was hung up on, and I pulled through. And then we talk about this later, and she was like, oh my gosh, I thought you were like falling and about to die when you yelled at me. So I got scared. I think that was one of those, like, emptied my tank a little bit.
Yeah.
Trying to stay on the wall right then.
That's an important thing. Like those moments can certainly happen up there. So how do you think about rebounding from those kinds of moments?
Yeah, I think it's important to just kind of recognize when you've gone there and just take some time to recharge, re-energize. One of my kind of rules about big route climbing is you have a sip of water and a snack on every pitch just to refuel yourself, because
that's a good
physically
rule.
Taking care of yourself is the way to keep your head from spinning out.
Yeah. That's a good rule, especially if you're somebody like me who gets like tunnel visioned into the job in front of you and then just forgets to eat or drink water.
Mm-hmm.
On a lot of multi-pitch things, I've found myself like several pitches in and getting hangry and getting flustered, and it's because I haven't drank any water. I haven't eaten anything because I'm an idiot.
Yeah. So I always keep like at least a bar in a pocket, or like some shot blocks, and you just like eat 2 shot blocks on every pitch. And then one of the like the mini Gatorade bottles clipped to my harness, super lightweight. But that way, like you can have a couple sips like before you start hauling or whatever.
Yeah. That's
because
smart.
that takes a lot of energy. And if you just climb a hard pitch and then you got to haul, like it's too much energy to do without drinking water, especially on El Cap where it's hot.
Yeah. That's super smart.
Yeah.
So Hollow Flake is probably just going to be scary for folks.
Oh, actually, so I went up there last time I was up there with a new number 7, and I all of a sudden realized that it is 5'7". No, it's actually 5'9". There's a little 5'9" bit, but when you're not holding on for dear life, like you're essentially free soloing the pitch with a rope on, it turns out you can use a lot less energy on it, so it's not terrifying and like feels pretty easy. But and people will joke, like me and my friends have talked about this. It's like kind of a rite of passage to do that thing prior to number 7s being creative. But I'm gonna bring a number 7 up there from now on because it just
no doubt
makes me not waste that headspace.
Yeah, that's super smart actually, and it's I like that you mentioned that it just makes you not waste that like mental energy, because I do think there's a culture, especially in like up and coming climbers, to do the thing that's full of bravado instead of the thing that's safer, and smarter. And not only is it safer, but it also saves you that mental energy and the physical energy of not over gripping for an entire pitch,
and stuffing
and just
yourself
being super
back
tensioned.
in there so that you don't fall out.
Yeah.
If you climb a little bit more on the outside of it, it's easier.
Yeah. I love that. All right, leaving Hollow Flake. What's the next pitch like?
I have a couple friends that will call this the real Hollow Flake pitch.
Oh, okay.
It's another kind of sleeper bit of a heart. I mean, it's a chimney to start off with. Weird flaring thing. Again, you can like put a 6 in for a little bit and then it tips out and then you got no pro off of the ledge for 30 feet or something. And then you have to leave the chimney and go out onto kind of the left face. And you get to plug a piece of gear in behind a flake right there before you make that exit move, but it's like a blindly placed. It's funny. I always think of it as a green alien, and I haven't even climbed with green aliens on that thing in years, but it was always the green alien back in the day. Now it's probably like the blue totem, I guess, is what I use now. But
funny.
I know where it is, but you don't know where it is. You're like, where is this thing? Like you can't see it. And
I love how fluent you are in the different types of cams that you could just do that right then. Like it's not the green alien anymore; it's the blue totem. It's like talking to a high level sport climber who can just bounce between French grades and Yosemite grades or whatever, or high level boulder who can do that. Because at this point in my climbing career, I definitely cannot think about like how do I translate from Black Diamond to Metolius to Totem to Alien to whatever. I can't. There's no way I could do it.
I'm a nerd about it for sure. And I'll get into little tiny arguments with people because the blue totem's a little bit bigger than the green alien.
See, I would have no idea.
But people will get into these little subtle arguments about the subtleties of the differences in sizes between the different brands and like where something goes better. Because there are things that like it doesn't fit a cam of like the Black Diamond size range. Like you need one of the ones that's in between. Like the orange Metolius that's between.
See?
the 0.4 and
point-
0.5 Camalots.
Yeah, I did know that actually because the orange happens to fit my fingers quite well. That's the reason I know
you do
it.
have kind of big fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my knuckles are getting bigger nowadays, so maybe I no
Mine
longer
too.
fit the orange as well as I once did.
No.
Question here. This is something that in my research during this season, I discovered that I never knew about climbing. And that's that chimneying is not just this like super intuitive technique for everyone. I had no idea that that was a thing. And I learned this because I was reading Jerry Moffat's book again. And he talks about doing the first free ascent of Lost Arrow Spire with Ron Kauk for a television show. And he was supposed to be leading the chimney, and he couldn't. He physically couldn't do the chimney.
Interesting.
And Ron Kauk had to do it. And I was like, what do you mean you couldn't do the chimney? That doesn't make any sense to me. Are you aware of this? That chimneying is not just a thing we learn when we're little kids and then we can just do it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I have had some conversations with people around this because I used to, I grew up climbing trees. We used to climb on the roof of my house that my dad yelled at us for because we were probably like messing it up a little bit. But we lived in this like partial A-frame house, and then there was an addition onto it, and there was like some chimney moves to get onto the roof of the addition between the A-frame wall and that thing. And maybe that's where I learned it. Maybe it was tree climbing. Maybe it was climbing up the door jams. There was a chimney in the climbing gym in Santa Cruz where I grew up climbing.
Yeah, there were chimneys in the bouldering gym I started climbing in, actually.
So I don't know. I've always known how to climb chimneys. But yeah, I guess not everybody does that. So
yeah, interesting. I didn't know that, Joe. If you're one of those people who are like, I don't fuck with chimneys, maybe do some chimneying before you go up El Cap.
Definitely.
Okay, here's what I want to know. After this pitch, the real hollow flake pitch, do you prefer and have? I'm sure you've tried both ways. Do you go into the monster early down here, or do you continue up and go in the original way?
The original way, I think, is better. And I actually hadn't tried the Bermuda Dunes way, the lower variation, for a number of years, and decided to try it at one point because I was, and we'll talk about the down climb pitch into the monster. But that pitch is hard for me, and that was one of the pitches that I was worried about. And somebody was like, "Oh, well, you should just try this other variation." And I tried it, and I decided that it was like it just adds a lot more off-width climbing below the monster. If you do it that way, you divide the monster up into two pitches, but it just turns into this like very physical thing, and you have to go out like a little roof in the off-width, and it's doable. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it's harder or not really, but it's way more physical. And I was like, it's not worth the energy. And the ear is one of the coolest pitches on the whole wall. And if you skip the ear, it's kind of sad. So I like to go up. All right,
then let's continue up. I hadn't heard. I had heard there was a lower traverse. And that if you traversed over in lower, it was hands initially.
It is. It gets gradually.
So I wasn't sure when it turned into off-width there.
It turns into off-width maybe, I want to say like 15 feet or so below where you would climb in. So it doesn't add that much more, but there's this one steep like little roofy section to it.
Got it. Okay, then we continue up off of the real hollow flake pitch.
The real hollow flake pitch up. One of the coolest pitches, actually, so the ear pitch is also very cool, but the pitch below that is one of my favorite pitches, and it's got this, I think probably because the water pours down from inside the ear when there's rainstorms and water's coming down, but it's got like very textured, dark colored, like, it's just like very featured, interesting.
Like a patina of some sort.
It's not patina. It's like it almost has these like pockmark kind of texture to it that if you've climbed in other, I mean, it's got to be from the water because it's very similar to some of the rock that's in the lower Yosemite Falls amphitheater. It's like, I don't know, it's like harder textured. It's not slippery patina. And then it's like a beautiful crack. And then there's these diorite little knob pieces to it too. And so it's just fun climbing.
Yeah, cool.
And it's right where the angle of the wall kicks back. And you're like, I mean, the angle of the wall kind of kicks back a little bit around the hollow flake, but you're like in the flake and you're in the chimney after that. And then you come out and you start getting into the like real vertical climbing and you're not quite halfway up El Cap, but you're getting there. And you're like, oh, wow, I'm exposed. I'm like up here in this cool place now.
Got it. Yeah, I talk about this in the episode a little, that a lot of the route you're kind of in these corners and, you know, behind these features. And so you don't get tons of exposure until you get to that traverse that we'll talk about later. But it's interesting to know that there is like this moment of exposure there. That's cool. And then that leads you to the ear pitch. So what is it that's so cool about the ear pitch?
Oh, gosh. This is like telling the end of a movie.
It's funny because I've never, in all my research, I haven't read anything where people are like, you can't miss the ear pitch.
It's so cool. It's a weird gaping, like it's a feature that's sort of separate from the main face of the wall, and you climb behind it. And you're just like climbing up in this dark corner for a little bit. It's like hand crack, whatever. Well, actually, before you get into that, you do have to do a hard move that is quite hard if you're short. Maybe the other hardest move on Freerider.
The second hardest move in the world.
If you're under like 5'7" or 8 or something like that, like you can't reach the hold from the foot. But
got it.
So you do that move, and then you get up into this feature, and then you start. So once you get kind of to the top of the feature, you start traversing out, and it's a wide crack that you kind of traverse out under, and you're chimneying. But there's like features on the wall, and
so is it like Bombay sort of?
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you're like above just air because you've traversed out under this kind of Bombay roof, and you're facing outward from the wall. Like that's the way that you face in that chimney.
Yeah,
and
that's cool.
It's just so wild. And then you climb through like one last little bit of wide stuff to get up through the ear feature, kind of top out on it, and then you're on this little ledge.
That's really cool.
It's really neat up there.
I do have a secret love affair with Bombay chimneys. Some of the most memorable moments in my climbing career have been in strange Bombay chimneys, or off with roofs that turn into this weird flare that you get up inside of. I love that moment when you're up inside this thing and the whole bottom has just dropped away and there's nothing below you. Yeah. If you happen to be a Red River climber and you're listening, there's an old route that's probably been lost to time called Into the Void. That is a really cool Bombay chimney. And at the very end of it, you have to like down climb out of it and traverse around this like block that's stuck inside of the chimney, and then back up into the chimney to clip the anchors. It's very cool. So
that's super cool. I want to check that out. That sounds fun.
There's an amazing finger crack right under it and an amazing off width right under it. So I'll take you there sometime. We should go do it.
That sounds good.
I can give you the Red River Crack tour for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And the sport tour. That does sound cool. I'm surprised I haven't heard more about it actually, because I love those unique things.
I think people don't talk about it a ton because it's not like a hard pitch at all. But I remember somebody telling me about it before I went up there, and they told it to me like, just remember to face outward.
Right.
But like, I'm not going to tell you anything else about it. It's just cool up there. Like, go check it out. Take your helmet off before you go up into it.
That's good to know too. I think it also probably gets overshadowed by what comes next.
Yeah, true.
You know, like once you're on top of that pitch, is this interesting spot in the history of the wall. In that there's the 13C that Todd and Paul did, that Hudon and Jones almost did, except for 4 moves at the top. And at the time, it would have been maybe the hardest route in the world if they had done it, or the hardest pitch in the world. And then Todd and Paul do it. It becomes this source of all sorts of speculation, people saying there's no way they could have done it. And then this is where Huber is up there trying to do the Salathe and decides that he's going to go into the monster off with instead. And Todd and Paul had climbed the monster, but decided they did not want to do it. In fact, Paul in his book calls it a vile crevice. So he wants nothing to do with. So they go back to this much harder pitch instead of doing the off-width. So there's all this controversy and speculation and interesting history that goes on in this spot. So I suspect that's why I haven't heard anything about the ears, because right above it is all this drama.
Yeah. That pitch, the pitch that Todd and Paul free climbed is a cool pitch. And the start of it is this, like, my experience again on the first time that I climbed the Salathe was like freeing as much as possible.
Yeah.
And there's like this overhanging fist crack to start it that's like 510 before you get into the 513 climbing. And so I was like, I want to free climb as much as I can until I got to pull out the aiders. And
Yeah.
those were some hero moves because you're just exposed, like,
that's cool.
about, I don't know, probably 1,500 feet off the deck or something at that point.
Yeah.
It's pretty neat.
That's cool. Quick question for you while we're here. I don't want to get too much into the ethics around big wall climbing at all right now, but that pitch is really interesting in that it's got like 2 no-hand stances on it. So some of the people, like Thomas Huber, when he did it, he very openly says there's a giant asterisks on my ascent because I just lowered down to a stance and then finished that part of the pitch like I was yo-yoing it, essentially. How do you feel about that idea of like the no-hand stances that happen on big walls? Is that a thing you're a fan of? And if so, can we bring that to sport climbing? That would be great.
I think it's a thing that a lot of people do for sure. How do I feel about it? I think that if it's something that I care enough about, I'm not going to feel that great about doing it that style. Like I want to send the pitch. Which is arbitrary of where the pitches end, because sometimes the anchors are not even in as good of a stance as the stance that I'm saying you're not supposed to go down to. But I don't know. That's sort of my feeling about it. And then there's things that if I just don't really care that much about it, I just don't care that much about it, and I'm not going to bother.
Yeah,
but
totally. Okay, so traversing into the monster. Talk to me about this.
So this is, again, I mean, we've talked about what it's like in that position on the wall. It's very exposed all of the sudden.
Yeah.
You're just looking straight down at the ground after not having experienced that really the whole way up till here. And then you leave a ledge and traverse sideways and downward. And you're underclinging off of like some okay holds, but like slabby feet. Like not, I mean, there are feet, but they're dime edges essentially. And so it feels very intimidating to transition into that. And you have the anchor that you're clipped into, which is bomber bolts. And then there's this big block that a lot of people put pro behind, and I'm going to take this moment to put a plug in for people to not put pro behind that block because I think someday somebody's going to die.
Yeah.
There is, if you climb up just a little bit higher before you start doing the traverse, there's a spot where I've stacked a couple of offset cams. I can't remember off the top of my head what they are, but you can get 2 cams in that are above that block, and they're good. I've fallen on them, and it keeps you from just swinging into the anchor when you do the traverse.
Got
And
it.
then you do the rest of the traverse just like 20 feet sideways without any other gear in. And so if you fall, and it like gets harder and harder as you go until you actually
of course it does.
latch into the monster. You're just taking these giant swinging whippers into space, essentially. And it's not. So when I talk about falling practice with people and getting comfortable with falling, like a lot of times what we're doing is like starting to climb just a little bit higher above your bolt or above your gear and incrementally getting more comfortable with those falls as they get bigger. And then I always tell people that like you get to a point where you're comfortable with those vertical falls, like where you're straight above your pieces, but then there's other falls that your body hasn't developed comfort with, and you don't know what it's like because you just haven't done it enough. And for me, sideways falls are one of those things. We just don't do it that much, and it makes me pretty uncomfortable to think about what that's going to be like to take that fall.
Sure.
And so, as you're progressing into falling practice and trying to get better with that kind of stuff, you got to think about taking those falls that are sideways or from weird positions like laybacking or with a heel hook over your head or something like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that. And I hadn't thought about this for years, but I had a climbing partner, this woman I used to climb with years and years ago. At some point in her climbing, someone had really scared her about pendulum falls. And I don't know what it was that scared her, but anytime there was the specter of a pendulum fall, even if it was very small, she would really start freaking out and just start repeating, I'm going to pendulum, I'm going to pendulum, I'm going to pendulum over and over and over. And it scared her to death. And I wish I knew what it was that had scared her initially. And I hadn't thought about that in forever. But yeah, that's a real thing.
It is. Your body registers as like, that's not okay. Like, there's some trauma around that or just unfamiliarity with what happens when you fall at that angle as opposed to straight up and down. So it's a little scary.
Yeah. Well, there's been a lot made about the monster. So tell me a little bit about it.
So it is I think to describe it best, you got to think about when you look up at that feature from El Cap Meadow, and it's like the crack that you can see from the ground. It's a 200-foot, pretty much number 6 crack. And so you can like see it splitting the face up there.
Yeah.
And if you've been there and then you're looking at it from the ground, you're like, oh yeah, like that's an intimidating feature. Like that's what that is, way up there on the wall. And for like, you can't see a hand crack from that distance.
Right, totally.
So,
though if you're inexperienced, you might be standing in the meadow thinking that's a splitter hand crack for a long way. It's just like the stove legs up there.
But I think what makes it is really how long it is.
Yeah.
You just have to commit to like keep on going. And then it again kind of gets hardest toward the top of it. And if you're like fighting in and off with the whole way up it, like all you want to do is not do it anymore when you get to that hard part. And you're just like, what if I just hang? No. So it's really just, it's an exercise of patience to just keep going up centimeter by centimeter for 200 feet, you know?
That's an aspect of off-width climbing that I think a lot of people get thrown by, is we're we're so used to being able to climb up things quickly, you know, and off-width climbing is so slow and all about patience and just holding that, finding ways to like relax your upper body while your lower body is tensioned and vice versa, so that you don't totally blow yourself out just fighting the whole time.
Yeah. And it can be like really frustrating especially if you don't know how to do the movement and you're like, I'm not making any upward progress. And I just strained so hard. And then I like slipped back down again a little bit and like didn't fall, but just like lost the terrain that I had gained.
And that took me 10 minutes to gain.
It's like, it could be heartbreaking.
Yeah, totally. But that pitch took the Hubers an hour to do. When they did the first ascent of Freerider in 15 hours, and that pitch was an hour of it.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah.
And you can take your time on it. Like there are some fully no hands rest stances. There's like a couple little ledges in there that you can hang out on and relax and work up the courage to continue forth.
Yeah, fight the extra gravity that happens when you get to stand on that ledge.
Yeah. But just I had this moment of understand, like an analogy of patience that we were just talking about Moonlight Buttress earlier, and to get to the base of Moonlight, you got to cross this freezing cold river on slippery and sort of sharp rocks, and we would go barefoot doing it.
Yeah.
And then I realized that I had to have the same headspace walking across the freezing cold river with bare feet as I did like trying to be patient in like the one wide pitch that's up there. And you can't rush when you're walking bare feet across sharp stones in the water. But the water's very cold and you're like screaming in pain from the cold and you just want to rush across, but you have to go slow. And like that's something I think if you haven't climbed an off-width before, you're probably sort of familiar with the feeling of like not wanting to be in cold water anymore, but you can't rush it.
Yeah, it's not like you can get out quickly. Because if you do, you're going to fall in and it's going to suck worse.
Yeah, or slice your foot open.
Yeah, totally. Well, that analogy, I just want to highlight something that I haven't highlighted yet, but it all the way back to talking about the ear and this, Bombay chimney, and you were so excited about this thing that for a lot of people could be really scary, new. I think that's a real testament to your ability to really come in with curiosity and something different than dread. So I just wanted to put a highlighter on that for a second because I can see your face and I can see you smiling and excited talking about the things that are also scary. So I just wanted to make that point.
I do love that rock climb.
Well, you've done basically the same move over and over and over for 200 feet, and you're frustrated and you're tired, and that puts you. I think there's a short pitch after the monster that puts you on El Cap Spire. Is that right?
Yeah. So you get you climb like 20 feet. There's one more little wide section after a ledge that are the anchors of the monster. You get into the alcove.
This is the alcove.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so the alcove is there, and then there's another pitch above the alcove if you're going to go that way to get on top of El Cap Spire.
And there's another way to go?
There's another way to go.
Okay.
So the classic route does a chimney that gets you up on top of the spire, and then the pitch from the spire is a very hard, like 0.75 mostly crack into some weird awkwardness, which I think is the only pitch that Yuji did not do first go on his attempt to.
Oh, really?
On-site Freerider.
Yeah.
I believe that's what story, like he fell
Crazy.
there, which like it's a 5'11" pitch,
yeah,
but it's hard.
Yeah.
So just that's why I avoid that pitch.
Crazy.
But
so you avoid the pitch
alternative
off of
pitch,
El Cap Spire?
Well, so the alternative pitch leaving the alcove, basically, instead of going on to El Cap Spire, you continue up from the chimney and stay right
And
and
that's
do
where
some
Bermuda
wide
Dunes
stuff.
goes, right?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's another bit of wide. It's a little bit harder. Like it's a little more physical, wide climbing right there. But it's like 11A, and I think it's more. It may be equally physical.
Sure.
But I feel like it's higher probability. Like I
Got
might
it.
fall on the 511.75 crack because
Yeah.
it's a hard size for me. But this
Yeah.
pitch, I'm probably not going to fall on.
Got it.
So that links into the top of the 0.75 crack pitch. So it makes it one pitch instead of two pitches if you don't go onto the spire.
Got it. And then after that, another short-ish pitch, right?
Yeah.
That leads us. Is there anything consequential about that pitch?
Not really. It's a pretty fun little cracking it, like tight hands in a corner pitch.
Okay.
And then some easy scrambly stuff to the ledge that starts what.
The confusion.
The confusion.
Kris Kalous told me that he got a call from someone at the anchors at this spot because they were like, I don't know where to go. I don't know what's happening up here. They were just confused. So what we're looking at now is like boulder problem pitch out right, Teflon corners left, the original aid line goes up the center.
Yep.
The way Kalous described it is that there are kind of bolts and anchors and old tat and strange, it just seems confusing. Is that how you feel about that spot?
I could see that being confusing for sure. Yeah. I think because I went the original aid way the first time I was up there, like that was very straightforward.
Yeah.
And then when I went back to try and free climb things up there, I knew that like you go left to step around, like around this corner into the Teflon corner.
Got it.
And then you step right and like pull around this other little corner that then kind of comes back left to get onto the boulder.
Right.
problem.
It's like a little button hook around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there are, I think, 2 different anchors there. So yeah, you got to choose which anchor you want to go from depending on which direction you're going to head.
Got it. How did you choose that you wanted to do the Teflon as opposed to the boulder problem?
It's just a style thing. I kind of figured from what I heard about the 2 different variations that like bouldery, very physical, also more challenging if you're shorter to do the boulder problem. I was like,
Sure.
That's probably going to be really hard for me versus stimming. Like I'm pretty good at stimming. So
Got it.
I just have always, from like the very first time I tried to go up there, like the Teflon corner seemed like the way. And it even became in like subsequent speed climbing ascents when I went up there. It's faster than going up the aid climbing variation, I think.
Okay.
So I've kind of always just gone that way. One time I tried the boulder problem and I was like, yeah, I think I'll stick with the Teflon. It seems easier.
This spot, like, I mean, I'd heard about the boulder problem and the Teflon corner, and you kind of choose your own adventure there. I'd heard about that for years before I really started considering it. And once I started thinking about it, I was like, how often do we get to just choose which pitch to do on walls? And so I sent you a text, and you said there are a bunch of other scenarios where that happens. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, the first things that popped into my mind when you asked me that question were Astroman and the Rostrum are both like very classic Yosemite Valley free climbs that have variations of pitches.
Is the variation on Astroman you're talking about like the like sort of vegetated corner to the right that Dean soloed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Versus the little boulder problem thing.
Yeah.
And
I had no idea people climbed that other than Dean when soloing it.
I almost want to say that that's the way that most people go these days,
really?
actually. And I think it's partially that gear is better these days So you can actually get pro on that pitch.
Yeah.
And
the boulder problem is kind of scary.
Straightforward. Or not straightforward. It's straight up. It's the direct. Whereas the boulder problem is this like silly go around and do these hard moves that seems, I mean, I shouldn't say silly, like whatever, people can do what they want with it. I'm not going to yuck other people's yum.
It is a strange traverse across a slab, do this really funny move up over this little bulging thing that frankly to me seemed scary because it's like if I slip right here, I could probably hit this like weird slabby flake I'm standing on or something.
Yeah, I think I remember that too. And so, it just seems a little bit out of character of like the rest of the route. And so since I did do that pitch on the first time that I was up there, I think maybe it was because I was like, oh, it's the original. Like that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And since then I've just gone the other way and you can link pitches through that and get up to the base of the enduro corner and it all just seems like it flows better.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because, and you still consider it Astroman, even though you're like skipping one of the like original crux pitches of the route. And there's no judging here. I'm just curious about like how people see it.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how people see it. I think that if you're taking away like the crux pitch that would then change the grade of the route,
right?
I think maybe that's where a discrepancy lies, but you still get the Harding slot, which is not the crux pitch, but it's like the crux pitch, arguably. And you get the enduro corner.
Yeah, the enduro corner.
So it stays the same grade.
Yeah.
And those are the two pitches that like people think about when they think about Astroman.
Sure.
And so I think that maybe that's where it stays the route.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the characteristic classic and crux pitches. Although with Freerider, like these are two variations on a crux, which are rated slightly differently.
Right. Though I think they were both 12D originally, right?
And then the thing
boulder broke.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing because Huber did the boulder when he was trying to free the Salathe, even though Todd and Paul had done the Teflon corner. So he created a variation there as well. But then I've also heard some people say to do Freerider, you have to do the boulder, even though it was a variation created while Huber was doing a whole different route. So for me, it makes total sense that these two things are really similar in grade, totally different styles, right next to each other at the same spot to get to choose your adventure.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of one on the rostrum though. Where's that?
There's a bunch of pitches on that wall actually.
I know like the alien
all
finish
over the place.
and
There's variations.
Got it.
But I think the typical one that is still like very much in character with the rostrum any way you go is the second pitch. And the original variation steps left into this 511 finger crack. And then the variation that I think actually, again, I want to say more people are doing these days goes up the chimney straight up from the second or from the top of the first pitch.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before, but on several routes, I remember thinking, why don't we just go this way? And in fact, I think the only reason on the rostrum I knew to do the finger crack was watching video of Peter Croft do it. And like that, him climbing that finger crack being like burned into my memory was the only reason I knew like, oh yeah, we're going over there. That's the thing we're climbing, you know? That's interesting. Yeah, it's just something I hadn't really thought about, not being like immersed in the valley free climbing scene, that there's so much choose your own adventure pitches. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Teflon corner. Tell me about it.
Well, so it's called the Teflon based on the whole non-stick concept, right?
Yeah.
So from the ledge that we left talking about earlier, there's a intro pitch that maybe some people link it into the actual crux of the Teflon, and some people break it into two. There's stance,
Right.
bolted anchor there. And then so that pitch is, I think, 11A or B or something like that. And it's, I don't know, nothing to write home about. It's just a pitch that doesn't get climbed on very often.
Right.
Compared to the other pitches up there. And the Teflon corner itself, like the crux bit of it, also doesn't get climbed that much. More
Right.
people are doing the boulder problem because all these gym kids that
Yeah,
know
totally.
how to boulder. But the Teflon corner proper, the crux bit of it, is actually a fairly short section. It's 2 bolts. After you do, like, you step off the anchor, do a little bit of shenanigans to get up at a stance, which again makes those first moves harder than any of the other moves because you got to leave the
little
ledge.
Yeah, for sure.
And then you're just like palm pressing and smearing. It's very shouldery, like power stem. Like you have to power up into like both hands pressing, and then get your feet up.
Yeah.
And then you kind of do some of the same moves over and over, switching back and forth. And
there's great footage of it in the As Free as Can Be film with Jordan and Mark, of Mark fighting with the intro to that pitch.
Yeah, it's tough, and you can fall off at any point. But again, like none of the moves are really that hard. It's just like keep doing it.
Yeah.
And
it's like taking the like anxiety and trust of like one foothold that you have to believe in and applying it to all 4 points of contact. You have to believe them all equally. Yeah. That's cool. I love and hate those kinds of sections of rock climbs where it's all belief. I think they're so cool, but they're also so frustrating.
Yeah, it's totally frustrating.
Yeah.
Because you're like, you're in it and you feel like you're good, and then all of a sudden you're out. And
yeah.
it's
Do
like
you have to go
subtle
through any sort of like mindset shift when you're coming out of these crack pitches and then you're stepping onto this like stemming test piece?
I mean, it is a lot more precision on that. So you have to just get really focused and again, very patient with slow incremental progress.
Sure.
Because it's 2 bolts. It's 15 feet worth of climbing or whatever through that corner. Like it's not very far, but it takes some time because every single move has to be just right.
Yeah.
Different than the wide crack climbing where it takes time because you're only making centimeters of progress at a time, but kind of a similar patience piece, I think.
Yeah. And then once you're through the Teflon corner, this is where we're putting Elmo's fish, right?
Gosh, next time I'm up there in the sewer, I'm going to be laughing.
You get to just switch it out with some limestone sport climbing.
Big bucket pockets.
Yeah. So I've heard some horror stories about the sewer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the horror stories come from it being wet oftentimes, but it's not always wet.
Oh, got it.
It is hard, though. The wet part isn't really the hard part. It's hard kind of right below the anchor, where it just turns in. You have to like pull out of this weird, awkward chimney. There's chimney stemming face holds. It's a weird, wild pitch. It's actually like kind of cool if it's not wet.
Right.
And then you pull into this layback corner in like tight hands with no other features and like very steep. So it's just like very physical at the very end of the pitch.
And then you grab the big limestone pocket to clip the chains.
Yeah.
Yeah. And does the sewer end with the 10A hands section, or is that a separate pitch? The sewer doesn't end on the block, does it? Or does it?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're on the block, and I'm actually surprised here to see the OK bivvy for two note on the block, just because I wasn't aware. I thought the block was like a super small little thing.
No, it's a pretty big ledge.
Okay.
And the reason why it's only okay is it's like sloping outward.
Got it.
It's not a flat ledge, but it's a giant, like, take your harness off if you want to ledge. I mean, when we're sleeping up there, usually I'll keep like just the waist of my harness on just in case something happens. But
Sure.
yeah, it's big.
Well, let me ask this: when you're planning a Freerider free ascent, where do you plan to sleep on the wall, or do you?
It really depends on what all your tactics are, what you're trying to do. But
What would be your preference?
I like sleeping in the alcove.
Okay.
And the block are good. Like, those are both great places to sleep. I mean, you could put a portaledge in a number of other spots. But those are the places where you can like hang out on real ledges, which is just so much more comfortable than worrying about having everything clipped in all the time. You only have a small space to hang out on and poop next to your climbing partner and all of that stuff.
Totally. Well, while we're on this topic, I came across a comment that I didn't quite understand because I haven't been up there. Somebody on some forum somewhere was remarking about the famous photo of Todd and Paul leaving El Cap Spire.
Mm-hmm.
I think Todd's climbing up off of El Cap Spire. Paul's down there belaying, and there's a tent on El Cap Spire.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, if you've ever been there, you know that's ridiculous. So why is that ridiculous?
That there's a tent on El Cap Spire?
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure what he means
Okay.
by that. But
I was just curious if there was like something I was totally missing.
Or is it...
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's a beautiful spot to sleep. I remember my friend Mash telling me before I went up there that sleeping on the spire is kind of like sleeping on a chopping block. And you lay down up there and you look up and it's the Salothe roof essentially is what is straight above you.
Right above you, sure.
And there are these big chunks of rock and little ones all over the spire. And you're like, oh yeah, if stuff falls, it lands on this ledge. And the alcove feels safer.
That makes total sense, actually.
But it is a cool place to hang out and sleep. And I have slept there a couple of times when the alcove is crowded or whatever.
I love that you've just got like your like circuit of little hotel rooms up there. You're like, if there's people in the alcove, I'll sleep here.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's kind of like home up there.
So leaving the block, is this all one pitch from the block to Sur la Toile?
Yeah.
Now I've heard things, and I've had trouble like piecing this together just looking at topos, but I've heard people say that the pitch to Sur la Toile is like this really unique, exposed, interesting thing. But then you were debating maybe even getting rid of that pitch. So I'm curious about this.
So you leave the block and you climb up a thin hands crack with like features. It's pretty moderate section. And then you get into where if you're aid climbing, you climb up a little bit higher and then can kind of pendulum over and then climb up some flakes. If you're free climbing, you just kind of start climbing up these flakes. And the flakes are not super solid. Like, they're not going to break under you climbing them, but there's some of the gear that you're putting in, you're like, that's probably not going to hold. And weird like mantly moves up onto flakes. And then at the very top, you transition out kind of another leftward move from a flake into the base of this crack that is fingers at the bottom, slowly gets a little wider to hands right at the top of it. And my first time on the route, I was mixed free and aid, because you can't fully aid this pitch because there's a bunch of face climbing on it. And I ripped a cam and fell onto the pin that is there. And it was a fairly big fall, and I bent the heck out of the pin.
Ugh.
And so henceforth, I've been terrified of that. And
Yeah.
and the pin, I think, has since pulled or broken. I don't know. I remember multiple times being up there and being like, oh, now that thing's broken. Now it's gone. Now there's a different pin in there. And it changes a little bit.
Yeah.
And then one of the times I was up there more recently, I was free climbing, and I had messed up with the gear that I had, and I didn't have a cam to go into the very base of the finger crack. And so I start just climbing up the finger crack with the crappy pro that's in the face below me.
Yeah.
And it's getting hot, and my
Oh,
foot
no.
slips.
Oh.
And I hold on because I'm in, like, I think a pretty good finger lock at this point, but looking at a fall that you don't want to take. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what would happen if I'd taken that fall and just like let out this blood curdling scream. And my climbing partner was like, oh God.
Oh man, heart in your throat kind of a moment for sure. So that's a spooky pitch then for you,
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah.
Is there anything like super special about it? Is it like, what is it that I've read from people being like, I think I've heard people call it spectacular pitch.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe I'm just mistaking it with another pitch. I don't know.
I mean, I think there's cool movement on it. And that crack at the top is a cool crack for sure. But yeah, I don't know why people love that pitch. If they do.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'm mistaking it. And I had actually gone back and looked at some of my references because I know the enduro corners leave Sur-la-Toile.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in the middle of my research, I'm like, are people referring to the enduro corners as these spectacular pitches? But it was definitely people saying the pitch to Sur-la-Toile.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it literally might be my trauma with
Sure,
that pitch
sure.
that makes me not like it.
yeah.
That first time on it made me scared of it, and I can't shake it.
Yeah, totally could be. When you were talking about it, though, like climbing up these flakes and doing these mantles, it did remind me of some pitches that in my climbing career that I have loved that are like that are like mantle-y, a little more wandering and adventurous pitches that just stick out in my memory for some reason, even though I would never have just said, oh, that's a spectacular pitch, you know?
Well, I'm going to go up there with new eyes next time.
New curiosity,
New
Josie.
curiosity, and see if I can find
Don't dread the pitch to
This
Sur-la-Toile.
is a spectacular pitch. Somebody told me this is a spectacular pitch. I've never climbed it before. Like, this human now, who I am
This
now,
new
has never
human,
climbed
yeah.
it. And so it's a spectacular pitch. I'll go try it out.
I love it.
I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to Elmo's into
Elmo's fish
Sur-la-Toile.
into the spectacular pitch. Yeah. And then we're at the enduro corner. Like, is this like kind of classic Yosemite endurance, laybacking mixed with jamming? Is that what this is? When I think of enduro corner, I think of Astroman enduro corner, of course. There's so many things in Yosemite with the same names, you know, great roofs and enduro corners, and
Yeah.
so is that what it is?
Yeah. So it's most people divide it into two pitches. The first pitch is supposedly 11C. Man, the 11C pitches on this route.
Well, it's
hard.
because like this pitch was the first 512 on El Cap.
The 11C pitch.
The
the whole
12B.
thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
The 12B,
The
whatever,
upper pitch.
the upper
12B.
pitch
Yeah.
was the first 512 on El Cap. So I suspect when people, like when Hudon Jones did these pitches and they said 11C, it was like, we're edging into a territory that doesn't exist up here yet, so it's going to be hard for the grade.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
that's
totally.
my guess.
I mean, it stands to reason. And it also is like, if that pitch were on the ground and you hadn't climbed 22 pitches or whatever it is to get there, then it probably would be 11C. But you're always pretty tired at that point.
No doubt.
So it's basically starts with like a little bit of threes, gets a little bit smaller. The crux of it is fingers, and then it's like weird and hard to get to the anchors with not that great a pro. On like, you do some laybacking. Essentially what goes on in that part of the enduro corner, basically after the finger crux bit of the first pitch, it goes into this little offset thing where there's like some slopey holds to the right of where the crack is. And that's where on the second pitch, a lot of people will like knee bar through it. And you can knee bar through a couple moves on that first pitch as well. But the crack kind of goes away. And there's just this like slopey feature. And then some pen scars that are like these very blown out like bong scars, which if you don't know what a bong is, it's just, there's like really big pitons that make like a kind of rounded square hole in the wall that in one of those scars you can put either a number 1 or a number 2 cam. So like that's the size of it, but it's like super rounded, weird. Like not a great. It's like a slopey pinch hold that you can use on these things. And you're all pumped out after climbing this steep crack.
Enduro corner. Yeah. Have you tried linking the two?
No.
It's just preferable to stop.
It's hard enough for me to do one and then the other. For me, anyway. I guess
and there's no ledge at the belay, right?
It's a stance.
Oh, is there?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is a full, like, you could stand there, no hands. So
Got it.
Makes sense.
I was just thinking about Alex free soloing up there, and is he just forced into, I have to link these two pitches because I can't stop in the middle?
Yeah, and I think, the stance is sort of to the right of the crack, and so maybe it just flows better to keep moving.
Sure.
And if you're Alex, then climbing, it turns into 12 plus, I think, to link them together.
And then when you link them together, essentially, you're now under the roof, right?
Yeah.
So you're sitting there under the roof, and you sort of have to keep climbing if you're Alex.
Yeah, that's where there's not much of a stance, is right there under the roof. I think one of the other issues with linking the two is you would need a lot of pro. Like, that would take, at least for Immortal to climb it and protect it well, it would take more gear than any of the other pitches, because it goes through the sizes, but like a lot of multiple of those sizes. So
yeah, totally. When I talked with Kris Kalous, he made a big deal out of this traverse pitch, and for me, this traverse pitch is like Huber's big contribution. Paul and Todd had looked at the cracks out left that were part of Excalibur, and had that like in their back pocket as a, we'll go over there if we can't climb the head wall. But I think by Alex Huber traversing out there, finding this traverse that I wasn't even aware of, like how cool the traverse was until Kalous made a huge point of like, no, dude, you have to stop right now. We have to talk about this traverse. That pitch allows El Cap to be climbed at a relatively moderate grade. You know, you don't have to be a 13 plus climber anymore to do El Cap. And I think that's the big contribution that Huber made, which took me a while to get to, Josie, because I was having some feelings about Alex Huber and his pompousness when I went into this episode because of a past episode. So it took me a while to come to okay, Alex Huber did a great thing here. he didn't do the first ascent of many of these pitches, but this pitch is the thing that makes it. Even though it's not the crux, it's still the thing that makes it. And I think that's cool.
Mm-hmm. It is a super cool pitch. It is yet again a time where you get some sudden exposure.
Yeah.
Because going up like from the alcove, you've got like that alcove ledge below you, and then you go up through these corners, and there's like some other ledges. There's the block pitch that's underneath you for the enduro corners. And the enduro corners, when you're in them, like, yes, you're looking straight down at the ground, but it's like, it's not that steep right there. There's some slab below you. And it's wild and it's sick. I mean, most people have probably seen photos or at least watched Free Solo.
I'm actually looking at a photo of Dean on that corner right now.
But the feeling of it isn't quite the exposure. And then you go from the top of those pitches underneath the giant roof, traversing straight sideways, and you go around this corner, and on that corner, it's not like an erect corner, it's like a blunt buttress.
Got it.
On that, you're looking straight down, and you're getting this extra exposure because you're out on like the egg of this buttress. Like,
right. So it's like a shield out there that you're coming across. That's cool.
And it's steep.
Yeah.
And that pitch was so hard for me. And then I moved to Lander and started sport climbing more and climbing steep stuff. And I'm like, it's
almost fish.
It's almost fish. It's like steep buckets. It's much harder than almost fish. But it's totally out of character with the rest of the climbing because you're getting these weird little, it's a horizontal pocket band, kind of like the stuff that's in 10 Sleep.
Cool.
But these like weird little Waco features that you're just like grabbing the edge of as like rounded jug pockets.
It's almost like they're like water solution pockets.
Yeah.
That are coming across a weakness on the wall or something. That's cool.
Totally.
Wow.
And like no feet underneath you. So you're just like smearing feet on this steep thing. And for I don't know how long that pitch is. The hard part of it is like the pumpy part kind of going around the corner. And then there's another hard part right at the end. But that section's like probably only 15 feet or so. And you just get so pumped because probably because you're over gripping with the place that you're in and you're tired already.
Totally.
And you have no good feet. And you just got to like swing your feet around this corner.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That sounds so cool.
Yeah.
I love those moments where the whole like character of what you thought you were doing changes, you know? And for me, like big dihedrals always feel almost like I'm surrounded, you know? Even if there's big exposure below you, it still feels like you're enveloped in this thing. Like it's this big security blanket, you know?
Totally.
But there's definitely something about going around a corner or being on a shield where all of a sudden everything below you drops away and it's just air. That's such a cool feeling.
Yeah.
And again, another point where exposure is scary, you know? So it could be a really scary moment for people, but having like heard several people now talk about the like thrill of that pitch in a positive way instead of in a scary way.
Don't get me wrong, I've been scared.
Sure.
To poop myself and not want to do it.
Well, and I think that's part of thrill, you know, is there is some fear there, but it's fear that you're glad to move into. You know, maybe it's not a pitch that you're dreading as much as looking forward to.
Yeah, and the more I climb in Lander, the more I look forward to it and wonder, like, how much less pumped am I going to get this time?
For sure. Yeah. And that pitch leads over to Round Table Ledge, which is a part of Excalibur. So it's appropriately named, which Steve Schneider and Jeff Schoen and Bill Price did a few years earlier. And I know this pitch leading off of Round Table was part of their free attempt on Excalibur. After that, it gets fuzzy, and I haven't been able to find a definite answer. I've talked to multiple people. I sent a text to Steve Schneider, never got a response. But after that, those are the only couple of pitches where I'm fuzzy, like the Scotty Burke, about the history. But talk to me about that pitch off of Round Table Ledge. Or first off, what's Round Table Ledge like? That's a cool name for a ledge, I think.
Yeah, it's this cool, like it's perfectly flat, like a table, and it's like it is rounded. It's not all the way round, but it's slotted back in this corner, so it's probably like I don't know, 70 degrees or something. Or no, maybe it's not quite that big. It's at least 45, maybe a little bit more than 45 of this like kind of perfect rounded.
That's cool.
Ledge.
I love themed names. First off, maybe it pisses me off more than anything else when people name off the theme of a crag or a route or something. When there's perfectly good names still available, like the Dark Side at the Red. Why would you name something American Dream? Come on. There are lots of Star Wars names you could have used.
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress. I love when people name things that fit not only the theme of the route or whatever, but also because it makes sense for the feature.
Yeah.
So Round Table's a cool name.
Yeah, and it's just it's a nice spot to hang out, and you're like, we just got through like all of this hard climbing, but it's not over.
Yeah. What's the pitch like off of Round Table?
Very physical, steep, tight hands for a minute, and it gets wide, and then it goes back to, it goes into this weird chimney flare thing, and then like fingers at the top, and it's like another 511. I think this one's 11D.
Yeah.
And it is. I think a lot of people underestimate it, and it's quite physical. But it's a cool pitch.
Cool.
And
my fuzziness here is like on multiple levels. Does that lead right into the Scotty Burke, or is there a pitch between?
So it leads into the Scotty Burke pitch.
Okay. But there's climbing before you get
into the Scotty Burke off with.
Got it.
And so there's actually the crux of the Scotty Burke pitch is on 11D fingers section that's just a little bit off of the anchors of the pitch above the round table. And then you get like a little stance before you pull into the wide stuff that is the Scotty Burke. And what's nice about the little stance is I left my big gear at the anchor and tagged it up to me after doing the finger crack bit.
That's smart.
So I didn't have to climb the hard 511 fingers with a bunch of heavy stuff hanging off of me.
Yeah, that's nice. And just for the people who are still with us who are like hoping one day to climb something like this but don't know what tagging means. Essentially, you've got a thin, lightweight tag line on your harness that stretches back to the belay so that when you get to this stance, you can then pull up gear.
Yeah.
When there's this famous, an intimidating off-width in the red called the Inhibitor that's got this off-width roof crux. It goes through a bunch of sizes, tight hands to fists, off-width, squeeze chimney, off-width roof, back to fists. It's my favorite pitch in the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to try and onsite it, and when I was going for the onsite, I got into the squeeze chimney, and I had decided to save weight and leave the number 5 on the ground, thinking I can probably find something else up there. And then I got up there, and I needed that number 5. So I just wedged myself into the squeeze chimney and lowered a big loop of rope down to the ground, 60 feet to the ground, and pulled up the number 5 and then kept climbing.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about that until you said the tagline, pulling up the big gear.
Yeah, the tagline for big wall free climbing is critical because then, especially if you're going in multiple days and going to haul, like climbing with the weight of your haul line on your harness is even a lot when
Yeah.
you're trying to send hard pitches. So
Yeah.
that tagline, then you can tag up the haul gear, which is the main reason that it's on you.
Yeah. And just to give some historical reference here, especially for the history nerds who are listening, I believe Excalibur, the aid route, exits left at the base of this pitch where the Scotty Burke is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've read a few accounts that say the free climbing continued up the Scotty Burke when they were trying to free climb Excalibur.
Okay.
As whatever the aid pitch out left wasn't freeable, so they took this alternate way. But the Scotty Burke, Calouse and I were texting back and forth when I was writing the episode, and he theorized that maybe because Scott Burke lived on top of El Cap for a while when he was trying to free the nose, that maybe he had wrapped down and done this pitch from the top.
That's the story that I have in my mind. Is like this guy was hanging out up there forever. Like,
Which makes total sense
yeah.
and is a cool story.
Yeah.
So maybe we just stick to that. But we asked James Lucas about it, and he said it's because of the photo of Scotty Burke on it in this old Mountain Hardware catalog. And I have the old catalog, actually, a PDF of it. So I'll be putting that in the Patreon for everyone to look at, because it is a very cool photo. And as soon as I saw the photo, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that photo now. You know, so maybe that's the reason it's called the Scotty Burke, or maybe it's because he was lived on El Cap as this like El Capitan troll and
yeah, exactly,
and just climbed everything in the top few pitches of the entire wall.
Sky cragging.
Yeah, totally. I love that term.
That's always the story that I'd heard, but I didn't put that much thought into it. If I see Steve again next time I'm in the valley, I'm gonna have to ask him.
Yeah, I would love to know.
It is such a cool wild pitch.
The Scotty Burke is
so physical. Like the section of like wide climbing on it is much harder than anything on the Monster. It's just short.
Yeah.
But the pitch itself is quite long and has a lot of varied, interesting stuff that I don't think gets talked about that much, but is
you always just hear Scotty Burke off width, so you think it's a long off width pitch similar to the Monster.
No, it's just it's probably like a 10-foot section of like kind of hard off width, and then you get into like it gets smaller. It's like fists for a ways, like
that's cool.
number 4 cams for a lot of climbing. But you can get other cams in. I think maybe you can get a 3 in at some point, so you don't need like a bunch of 4s up there. But then you go into this weird like maze of climb. You're like, wait, I'm going in there? Like you kind of like go into the wall and then climb this other crack, and it's just interesting up there.
I just want to point out again the wonder in your voice, the curiosity in it, as opposed to fear when you say, I'm going in there. I think that's such an important part of all of this, going up on something this long, this intimidating, this immense, to use the word you used at the very beginning, such an important part.
Yeah. And it's stuff like that I've always put a plug in for people going from the ground up on these things. Like, yes, wrapping in is going to help folks out with the hard pitches on these upper free climbs, but like the showing up there from the ground and being like still being surprised by what you find that's what it's about partially too. Like it's an adventure.
Totally. And then at this point, are you on the ledge that sort of connects with the Salathe, or is there one more pitch still?
No, you get onto the ledge there. Yeah. And climb so from the Salathe, you get onto Long Ledge and then there's an aid variation, there's the free variation, and all of those wind up at the same point as the top of the Scotty Burke. Got
it. And the free variation's like a bolted 512 that comes up to the ledge or something.
It's such a cool pitch. That might be one of the coolest pitches anywhere in the world.
Really?
Because it's just steep, diorite, like knob climby stuff way up there on El Cap with the Salathe head wall and the Salathe roof below you. So it's like pretty much the most exposed you'll ever be.
Cool.
Climbing on features that are like sticking out from the wall.
Cool.
So that's a neat pitch.
That's cool to hear.
And what I would
hadn't heard that
recommend
before.
if anybody is ever climbing the South A, even as an aid route, going that way instead of the original aid way, because the original aid way is terrifying. And there's like a pin missing on it from what it used to. I think the topo maybe still says that it's like 5.8 A2. It is not that. It's at least mandatory 10 plus at the moment. Without that old pen.
I love how much knowledge you have of all of the pieces of this wall. It's so fascinating to me.
A couple people have fallen on that pitch and like broken legs on Long Ledge. So as a former member of search and rescue there, I'm like, not recommended, or somebody go put that pen back in.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's cool to know about that pitch. And then you've joined the South A again. So what are the remaining pitches like to the top?
There's a 10 plus, like 0.5, 0.75 pitch leaving that ledge. Also a really cool pitch. That's one of the pitches that I was really psyched to free climb on my first time up the South A wall.
Yeah.
I tried really hard on it because I was exhausted, and it's kind of continuous. Like, I mean, it's not that long, but it's pumpy enough at a kind of hard size for me. And then you get into this weird little alcove and have to exit under this weird roof in, I think it's like some pen scars in the corner. And you're clipped into some old pitons in the roof, and it's kind of scary because you might hit the ledge if you fall.
Yeah, so there's still some adventure climbing up there that you need to have your head on for.
Yeah, and then you get up into this final little wide pitch, chimney for a second, and then pull out into hands, like beautiful crack finish, and then scramble up another pitch to the top from there, like a 5-0 pitch to the top or something.
That's cool. It's nice that there's like a nice crack pitch right there near the top, as opposed to just like 5 pitches of scrambling up slab or something, you know?
Yeah, no, you definitely like top out on some cool stuff.
That's really cool. What's your history with it, and what's your plan to go back? You have not done it in one push yet, right?
I have not. I've pretty much freed all the stuff and just.
And how do you?
Know.
I've heard so many like different ways of quantifying what people do on walls. So there are certainly people who, if they've freed all the individual pitches, would just say, "Yeah, I've done it."
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
Yeah,
and again, no judgment here. I'm just curious.
Big wall free climbing, like to say you free climbed the thing, you got to do it in one go from bottom to top. And I think that's a pretty universally agreed upon rule.
Okay.
I mean,
nowadays, because it wasn't always.
Yeah.
What about fixed lines? Like, I know a lot of people climb the free blast the day before, fix lines, go back down, jug the lines, and then start climbing. How do you feel about that sort of tactic?
Nah, I don't like it.
Okay.
I think the way that a lot of people do this is they'll go up and haul up to Heart ahead of time, and then you can rest.
Yep.
And then climb free blast without going back down.
Got it. Yeah.
Because I think like if you can go down to the ground and get the rest that the ground gives you, and pizza at the pizza deck and beers and hanging out with your friends, you're not on the wall anymore.
Got it. Okay. I just wanted to know. I think it's.
I was
the whole
hoping
world
I would get to
fascinating.
avoid the actually weighing in on the ethics debate here.
Yeah, I couldn't. I never intended to ask these questions, but we were here, and I was like, I gotta know now.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think what is nice about it is that like you get to have your opinion and you get to do it your way. And that's sort of how I'm feeling about the whole thing now, as a like, I don't need to go up there and free climb the whole thing in one push, not pull on any gear. I can go up there and just have a good time and pull on gear when I want and rest when I want and sit on gear if I want to. And it's still going to be this amazing adventure. I'm going to get to experience these cool pitches. I'm going to get to climb around that corner on that shield.
Yeah.
You know? So that's sort of how I'm feeling about it now.
Yeah. The like free as can be thing is great. It's fun. Yeah. I don't know, to answer your question about what my feelings about it in the future are. Like I've been up there on lots of speed climbing or aid climbing, worked the pitches, freed all the things, like at least on top rope. I haven't sent everything leading. But just to kind of in that method of free as can be, and it's fun. And at some point, I'll probably make an effort to go send the thing bottom to top. I haven't. The very first time we went up there, we went with that mentality of like, let's go try to free. And like, if we fell, we'd pull the rope and try to send, just to like have that experience of trying the first time. And I didn't send on that go. And then I haven't been back on another like actual attempt since then. Partially the one season that I like trained and was going to go do it, it wound up raining like all of May. And then since then, I just haven't made it a priority to go back and do it. I got tired of hauling haul bags on that wall.
Totally.
And so there's a vision and a dream of getting strong enough here on this lander sport climbing to try to do it in a day someday.
I love it.
But now this is going to be memorialized, me saying this, and now I'm like, now I'm going to have to at least try.
That's part of it, Josie. You're throwing your hat over the fence now, so at some point you have to climb the fence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I sure appreciate you coming over and sitting down for over 2 hours now.
Has it been that long?
Yeah,
wow.
Totally. To like break this whole thing down. I think it's fascinating. For me, I like learning this much about this route and not having been up there beyond Mammoth is really fun. And I want to go up there because I feel like I sort of tangentially know all these places on the wall that I want to now experience. And I hope there are people listening, and I bet there are people listening who are also starting to feel that way and want to go up there and not crowd the route, but just go up there and have this experience, you know.
I'll put in one more ethics plug.
Do it.
Because we're talking about crowds on the route, but like if you do decide that it is something that you want to do to wrap into the top of this thing, please be really considerate of the people that are going up. Like you give them the right of the way. Do not pull ropes on top of them. Like get out of their way because they're on this adventure that's very different from what you're doing.
Totally.
And preserving that adventure component to them and not whipping them in the face with ropes or peeing on them or just clogging up the route while they're trying to go. Leaving your fixed lines hanging all over the place. All of that stuff is annoying. And so that's where I will say with ethics, like do what you want, but don't affect other people's experience.
Well, I'm glad you do. I'm glad you did say that. You know, Kalous brought that up a little bit as well, just saying that the ethics are sort of changing, that the top-down approach is a little more frowned upon than it used to be because of that reason. So yeah, thanks for saying that. And I think it's valuable to put out there. But also just like I said, thank you for coming, for sitting down. I will have links where everybody can get a hold of you, and if they just want to hear more from you, there are a couple of episodes on my other show, the Power Company Podcast, where we talk about preparing for Yosemite, going to Yosemite, and preparing by limestone sport climbing, which I think is a really interesting idea. So. And now that Elmo's Fish is up on Freerider, it's even better.
Even better. Well, what are you doing in May? When do you want to go up there?
This May, no, because I have a toddler that I have to take care of. But in the future, I would absolutely take you up on that, because having a rope gun up there would be another great thing instead of having to hang it all out there. I'm all for being guided up it.
Cool. It'll be fun.
Yeah, let's do it. You guide me up that, I'll guide you around the red. My job is way easier.
Sounds like it. Well, thanks, Kris. And thanks for having me. It's fun to chat about this stuff.
1, 2.
All right, Written in Stone is produced by me, Kris Hampton, with help from Riley Rush and Emily Holland for Plugtone Audio, a group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. At the link in your show notes, you find all the things you expect, probably some you don't, including links for how you can work directly with Josie for your own goals, big walls, or otherwise. And look, this show is 100% rooted in the facts, but like Todd Skinner always said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And seriously, if you love what you're hearing, give us those 5 stars and a glowing review. The algorithm loves it, so more people find it, which means sponsors love it, which means we can make a season 2. And if you're a patron, you already know it's looking like it's going to be the 80s for season 2, but there is a poll in there. And if you haven't voted yet, go vote, because the 2000s could still squeak in. And then together, we can tell the stories of climbing's most important ascents, 1 decade at a time. You know, Josie's got me out here thinking I want to go free climb on El Cap. I thought I was done with any kind of big things. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. I could be convinced pretty easily. When I first pitched this idea to Josie, she was like, will people even find that interesting? But I personally found it really interesting and really fun to dig into this sort of process and what someone who has spent a lot of time up on El Cap, kind of what goes on in their head. I think it's fascinating. I hope you all found the same thing. And you never know. Maybe I'll be up on El Cap before terribly long. I wouldn't hold my breath, but I wouldn't bet against it. All right, big shout out and thank you to our newest rock star, Jason Burton, who is in fact a rock star or a folk star, if they call them folk stars or Americana star. I don't really know how to say that, to be honest, but I've used Jason's music in another podcast I produced, The Houlihan Narratives. He was the theme for season 1. And way back in episode 2, I think, when I talked with Katie Brown, we talked about her writing about me after performing in the Red River Gorge with a mandolin player. That was Jason. So Jason and I have been climbing together for a long time. He used to live just over the mountains over in Pinedale, and now he's moved on, and we miss him here. Hope I get to see you again soon, and thank you for the support. Who'd have thunk it 25 years ago in the Red River Gorge that either of us would be doing what we're doing now? Secret Stoners, next week. Next week is a big one. Riley and I have done tons of research. I have sent so many emails. Just last week, I heard from the person who's the subject of next week's episode. And thankfully, they did not say, I don't want you to do an episode. In fact, they wanted to answer some questions. That hasn't happened yet. She and her partner are They've got some things going on over there, and they haven't been able to get back to me yet, but they promised that they will. So I haven't gotten answers to my questions yet, but the thing is, I don't need them. I just want them. At this point, the episode is done, and I think we did her justice, and I'm happy about that because the American media in particular did not do her justice in the 1990s. And we're going to do our best. So next Monday, certainly, not even a question, the most important female boulder of the 1990s. And I'd never heard her name. Most of you have never heard her name. It's crazy to me that that's a real thing, but it's true. I can't wait for you to hear this story. All right, see you then.